The dust storm rolled across the open plains like a furious specter, obscuring everything in its path. Madeline Turner clutched her worn leather satchel tighter to her chest as she stumbled forward, each step more desperate than the last. Her once fine dress, now tattered and stained with the rust-colored dirt of the Arizona Territory, whipped violently around her ankles. It was 1878, and she was alone, miles from anywhere that might be called civilization, with night falling quickly and the howl of coyotes beginning to echo across the emptiness. She'd been traveling for 3 days since fleeing Tucson, surviving on meager rations and what little water she could carry. The stagecoach had abandoned her at the last outpost after discovering she couldn't pay the full fare, leaving her to walk the remaining distance to the small mining town of Copper Creek, where she'd heard there might be work for a woman with her particular skills. The first building she spotted through the swirling dust wasn't much more than a crooked wooden structure, but the warm glow of lantern light spilling from its windows was the most beautiful sight Madeline had seen in days. Her parched lips cracked as she tried to call out, but no sound emerged. She staggered the final few yards, her vision blurring as exhaustion and thirst claimed the last of her strength. Madeline collapsed against the weathered porch posts, knocking over a tin bucket with a clatter that seemed to echo across the entire desert. The door swung open immediately and a tall figure stood silhouetted against the light. "Good Lord," a deep voice exclaimed as strong arms reached out to steady her. Miss, can you hear me?" She tried to speak, to explain why she was there, but her voice was barely a whisper. The man, the cowboy, she could now see from his worn hat and dust-covered chaps, gently guided her inside. "You don't have to explain a thing," he said softly, helping her to a wooden chair by the fire. "Let's get you some water first." Through blurred vision, Madeline saw he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His movements were efficient as he poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup and brought it to her lips. "Small sips," he instructed, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm August O'Malley, this is my place." Madeline took the offered water, the liquid cooling her parched throat. After several careful sips, she found her voice again, though it was still raspy and weak. "Madeline Turner," she managed. "I was heading to Copper Creek." August's eyebrows rose slightly. "Well, Miss Turner, you found it, though I reckon most folks would say there's not much to find." He gestured around the modest room, which Madeline now realized was a combination of living quarters and what appeared to be a small trading post with shelves of supplies lining one wall. "You're a long way from anywhere, especially for a lady traveling alone." There was no judgment in his tone, just concern and perhaps curiosity. Madeline knew how it must look a woman alone in such a place, dressed in what had once been fine clothes, now reduced to rags. "I heard there was work here," she said, her voice growing stronger with each sip of water. "I'm a teacher, was a teacher." August nodded thoughtfully. "Copper Creek's got no school, not yet anyway, but there are children here who could use learning." He stood and moved to tend the fire. "You can rest here tonight. Tomorrow we can figure out what's next." The kindness in his eyes nearly undid her. Madeline had been running for so long, looking over her shoulder, expecting the worst from everyone she encountered. This simple act of humanity, offering shelter without questions, was something she'd almost forgotten existed. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the cup like a lifeline. August O'Malley said nothing more as he moved around the room, gathering a blanket and pillow to make a pallet by the fire. But Madeline caught him watching her with thoughtful eyes, and for the first time in months, she felt something other than fear, a flicker of hope, as fragile as a candle flame in the vast darkness of the Wild West night. Morning came with the soft golden glow of dawn stretching across the wooden floorboards. Madeline woke disoriented, memories of the previous evening flooding back as she recognized the small trading post. She sat up quickly, wincing at the soreness in her muscles from days of walking. August was already awake, moving quietly around a small stove in the corner where coffee brewed in a blackened pot. He glanced over as she stirred, "Mornin', Miss Turner. Hope you slept well." He poured coffee into a chipped mug and brought it to her. "It's strong only way to make it out here." "Thank you." Madeline accepted the coffee gratefully, becoming increasingly aware of her disheveled appearance in the light of day. She tried to smooth her tangled hair, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "Mr. O'Malley, I can't thank you enough for your kindness last night," August shrugged. "Folks help each other out here. It's the only way to survive." He returned to the stove and began dishing up a simple breakfast of beans and biscuits. "Once you've eaten, I can show you around Copper Creek, though it won't take long. Town's not much more than a few buildings and a lot of hope." As they ate, Madeline learned that August had come to the Arizona Territory 5 years earlier after the war, looking to start fresh where a man was judged by his character rather than his past. He'd built the trading post himself, supplying miners and the occasional settler with necessities too precious to do without in such an unforgiving land. "The mine's been good the past year," he explained, gesturing vaguely toward the hills. "Brought more families, which means more children. Folks have been talking about needing someone to teach them proper." Hope fluttered in Madeline's chest. "Then perhaps I've arrived at just the right time." August studied her for a moment. "Perhaps you have, though I wonder what makes a proper lady like yourself travel all this way alone." The question hung in the air, not accusatory but curious. Madeline set down her fork, debating how much to reveal. She'd learned the hard way that truth could be dangerous. "I needed a fresh start," she said carefully. "Sometimes the past is best left behind." August nodded, seeming to accept this. "Well, everyone in Copper Creek is running from something or chasing after something else. You'll fit right in." He stood, collecting their plates. "Let me introduce you to Widow Hanson. She takes in boarders, and she's got a good heart beneath all that vinegar." The town of Copper Creek was indeed small, a collection of wooden structures lining a single dusty street. Beside August's trading post stood a saloon, a small assayer's office, the widow's boarding house, and a handful of other buildings that served the needs of the miners who trudged up and down from the hillside each day. Widow Hanson proved to be a sturdy woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked Madeline up and down with frank assessment. "Another stray, August?" she asked, but there was kindness beneath her gruff exterior. "Well, come in then, girl. Let's get you settled and cleaned up." August tipped his hat. "I'll leave you ladies to it. Miss Turner, I'll speak with some of the families about the teaching if you're still interested." "I am," Madeline said firmly, "and thank you again, Mr. O'Malley." Something passed between them, then a moment of understanding, perhaps recognition of kindred spirits. Then August turned and strode away, his tall figure cutting a distinctive silhouette against the morning sun. Widow Hanson ushered Madeline inside, already talking about hot baths and clean clothes. "That man," she said, gesturing toward August's retreating form, "saved this town more than once, he has. Doesn't talk much about where he came from, but he's got a good heart. Lost his wife and child during the war, I heard. Never remarried." Madeline followed the widow into the simple but clean boarding house, filing away this information about the man who'd shown her such kindness. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to think that perhaps, just perhaps, Copper Creek might be the sanctuary she'd been searching for. Within a week, Madeline had settled into a routine at Copper Creek. True to his word, August had spoken with the families in town, and soon Madeline found herself teaching 12 children of various ages in a corner of the saloon during the morning hours before the establishment opened for its regular business. It wasn't ideal, but the children were eager to learn, and their parents paid what they could, sometimes in coins, often in goods. The work gave Madeline purpose, and slowly the haunted look began to fade from her eyes. She took her meals at Widow Hanson's with the other boarders, 2 miners and an elderly man who worked as the assayer's assistant. In the evenings, she would sometimes sit on the boarding house porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. It was on one such evening that August approached, his hat in his hands. "Evening, Miss Turner. Heard from the Miller boy that you've got them reading already." Madeline smiled, pleased by the recognition of her efforts. "Tommy's a quick study, they all are in their own ways." August nodded, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I was wondering. That is, I'm heading to Silver Springs tomorrow for supplies. It's a fair-sized town with a proper mercantile. Thought you might want to come along, see about getting some books or slates for your teaching. The invitation surprised her. That's very thoughtful, Mr. O'Malley. August, he corrected, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. If we're to be neighbors, might as well use Christian names. August, she repeated, finding she liked the way it sounded. Then you must call me Madeline. Madeline, he said, and something in the way he spoke her name sent a curious warmth through her. We'd leave at first light, be back before dark, if Widow Hanson approves, of course. Madeline laughed. I'm 26 years old, August. I don't need a chaperone's permission. His eyes crinkled at the corners. Maybe not, but we all need Widow Hanson's good graces if we want decent biscuits at breakfast. The journey to Silver Springs the next morning was pleasant, despite the early hour and the lingering chill in the desert air. August's wagon was well sprung, making the rutted trail more bearable, and conversation flowed easily between them. August pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area's history, including tales of Apache raids in years past and the uneasy peace that now existed. They mostly keep to themselves these days, he explained. The reservation's north of here. Chief Running Bear and I have an understanding I trade fair and his people leave Copper Creek be. You speak as if you know him personally, Madeline observed. August was quiet for a moment. We've broken bread together. After the war, I wandered for a spell, ended up half dead from thirst out in the Badlands. His people found me, nursed me back, taught me things about surviving out here that no white man knew. He glanced at her. Not something I talk about much in town. Folks have strong feelings about Indians. Madeline nodded, understanding. People fear what they don't understand. You sound like you speak from experience. She turned her face to the horizon. Perhaps I do. Silver Springs proved to be a bustling settlement compared to Copper Creek, with actual streets and buildings made of brick rather than just rough-hewn timber. The mercantile was impressive, stocked with goods from back east, and Madeline found herself lingering over items she hadn't seen in months: fine writing paper, leather-bound books, even bolts of fabric in colors brighter than the dusty palette of the desert. August watched her with a quiet smile. Get what you need for the children, he encouraged, and something for yourself too. By midday, they had completed most of their business and stopped for a meal at the hotel's dining room, a luxury that made Madeline realize how quickly she'd adapted to the simpler life of Copper Creek. As they were finishing, August excused himself to check on one last order at the blacksmith's. I'll meet you back at the wagon in an hour, he said, settling his hat back on his head. Take your time. Madeline wandered the small town, enjoying the novelty of proper storefronts and the bustle of activity. She was examining a display of bonnets in a shop window when a reflection in the glass made her blood run cold. Across the street, a man in a fine suit was stepping out of the bank, a man whose face she knew all too well, Victor Holloway, her former employer's son. The man she'd fled Tucson to escape. Panic seized her chest. She ducked into the nearest doorway, heart hammering against her ribs. It couldn't be. Not here, not now, when she'd just begun to feel safe. Through the window, she watched as Victor paused to light a cigar, his eyes scanning the street with the predatory gaze she remembered all too well. She pressed herself against the wall, praying he wouldn't turn in her direction. Madam, can I help you? Madeline startled at the shopkeeper's voice. I'm just looking, she managed, then slipped back outside, keeping her head down as she hurried toward the wagon, no longer caring about the agreed meeting time. She needed to warn August, needed to leave Silver Springs immediately. She reached the wagon and climbed into the back, concealing herself among the supplies they'd purchased. Minutes stretched like hours until finally she heard August's familiar footsteps approaching. Madeline. He called, confusion evident in his voice as he searched for her. Here, she whispered, raising her head just enough to be seen. Please, we need to leave. Now. August's expression shifted instantly from confusion to concern. Without question, he loaded the last of their supplies and climbed onto the driver's seat. guiding the horses out of town at a pace that wouldn't draw attention, but wasted no time in putting Silver Springs behind them. Only when the town had disappeared from view did August slow the horses and turn to where Madeline sat, still huddled among the supplies. "Want to tell me what that was about?" he asked quietly. Madeline closed her eyes, shame and fear warring within her. She'd hoped to leave her past behind to start fresh in Copper Creek without bringing her troubles to its doorstep, but now she owed August an explanation. "I saw someone," she began, her voice barely audible over the creak of the wagon wheels. "Someone from Tucson, someone dangerous." August's expression remained calm, but she saw his hands tighten on the reins. Dangerous how? The story spilled out then how she'd taken a position as governess to the Holloway family in Tucson, one of the wealthiest in the territory. How Victor, the eldest son, had begun to pay her unwanted attention. How his advances had grown increasingly aggressive until the night he'd cornered her in the library, drunk and determined. "I fought him off," she said, her voice strengthening with remembered anger. "I struck him with a brass candlestick. He fell, there was blood. I feared I'd killed him." August's jaw tightened. "And you ran?" Madeline nodded. "I took what money I had and fled that night. It wasn't until I reached the outpost that I heard he'd survived, but was telling everyone I'd tried to seduce him, then attacked him when he refused my advances." She laughed bitterly. "Who would believe my word against his? His father owns half of Tucson." The wagon rolled on in silence for several minutes. Finally, August spoke. "Thank you for telling me, for trusting me with this." He turned to meet her eyes. "But you should know if he recognized you. Silver Springs is too close. Word travels." The implication was clear. Her sanctuary at Copper Creek might be short-lived. "I could keep moving," she said quietly. "I never meant to bring trouble to your town." August's response was immediate and firm. "It's your town too now, and we protect our own in Copper Creek." The warmth of belonging spread through Madeline's chest at his words. For the first time since fleeing Tucson, she felt something stronger than fear resolve. She'd found something worth fighting for in this dusty little mining town, something she wasn't ready to abandon. "What should we do?" she asked. August considered for a moment. "For now, nothing. Maybe he didn't see you, but we'll keep watch, and Madeline." He paused, making sure she was listening. "If trouble comes, you won't face it alone, not anymore." The simple promise, delivered in his steady voice, felt more substantial than any protection money could buy. As they continued toward Copper Creek, the desert sunset painting the landscape in fire, Madeline realized that somewhere along the way, this place and this man had become more than just a temporary refuge. They had become something dangerously close to home. The next few weeks passed without incident, and gradually, Madeline began to hope that Victor hadn't noticed her in Silver Springs after all. Life in Copper Creek continued its steady rhythm, teaching in the mornings, helping Widow Hanson in the afternoons, and sometimes spending evenings at August's trading post, where they'd fallen into the habit of playing chess after the day's business was done. It was during one such evening that August broached a subject that had clearly been on his mind. "The children need a proper schoolhouse," he said, moving his knight across the board. "Can't keep teaching in the saloon forever." Madeline considered her next move both on the board and in the conversation. "It would be nice," she admitted, "but who would build it, and where?" August leaned back in his chair. "I've got land at the edge of town, and as for building it, folks around here know how to work with their hands. Miners need something to do on Sundays besides drink and gamble." She looked up from the chessboard, studying his face. "You've already thought this through." He nodded, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Spoke to some of the parents. They're willing to contribute lumber time. Even got the assayer to donate windows from that abandoned office." "August O'Malley," Madeline said, surprise and gratitude making her voice soft. "You've been planning this all along." He shrugged, suddenly interested in rearranging the captured pieces at the edge of the board. "You're good with those children. They deserve better than learning their letters with the smell of whiskey still hanging in the air." Madeline moved her queen, capturing his bishop. "Check," she said, then added more quietly, "Thank you." Their eyes met across the board, and for a moment, Something unspoken passed between them, something that made Madeline's heart beat a little faster and brought a flush of color to her cheeks. August cleared his throat and returned his attention to the game. "Better focus, Miss Turner, or you'll lose your queen next." The schoolhouse project began the following Sunday, with nearly every able-bodied man in Copper Creek arriving at the site August had chosen, tools in hand. Even Widow Hanson contributed, overseeing a group of women who prepared food for the workers. By sundown, the foundation had been marked and the first support beams erected. Madeline watched the activity with a sense of wonder. These people, many of whom she'd known for less than 2 months, were building something permanent. Something that acknowledged her place among them was more than temporary. The work continued over subsequent weekends, and as October gave way to November, the schoolhouse took shape, a simple but sturdy structure with large windows to capture the desert light. August supervised much of the construction, revealing a natural talent for leadership that the townsfolk clearly respected. It was during the final phase of construction, as Madeline was helping to install the slate board, that the first whisper of trouble reached Copper Creek. A rider arrived from Silver Springs, stopping first at the saloon before making his way to the construction site where most of the town had gathered. "August O'Malley about," he called, scanning the workers. August stepped forward, wiping dust from his hands. "That's me." The rider, a weathered man in his 40s with a deputy's badge pinned to his vest, looked relieved. "Got word from Sheriff Taylor in Silver Springs. Thought you should know there's men asking questions about a woman matching your schoolteacher's description." Madeline froze, the piece of chalk she'd been holding slipping from suddenly numb fingers. August's expression remained neutral. "That's so. What kind of questions?" Where she might have gone when she was in town, led by some fancy gentleman from Tucson name of Holloway. "Says she's wanted for theft and assault." Murmurs rippled through the gathered townsfolk. Madeline felt their eyes turn toward her, curiosity and suspicion mingling in their gazes. Shame and fear threatened to overwhelm her. August spoke before she could. "Appreciate the warning, Deputy." "Anything else Sheriff Taylor wanted to share?" The deputy shifted in his saddle. "Just said these men seemed determined and well armed." He glanced at Madeline, then back to August. "Whatever business you've got with them, O'Malley, might be best to settle it peaceful-like. Holloway's got influence all through the territory." After the deputy departed, an uncomfortable silence fell over the construction site. Finally, Widow Hanson broke it. "Well, anyone going to ask what this is about, or are we all going to stand around gawking like fools?" she demanded, hands on her hips. All eyes turned to Madeline. She swallowed hard, looking to August, who gave her a slight nod of encouragement. "I worked for the Holloway family in Tucson," she began, her voice gaining strength as she continued. She told them everything: Victor's unwanted advances, her desperate defense, the lies he'd spread afterward. When she finished, the silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Then, surprisingly, it was Jacob Miller, father of her brightest student, who spoke first. "My Tommy's reading because of you, Miss Turner, first in our family to do so." He stepped forward, positioning himself beside her. "If these men come to Copper Creek, they'll have to get through me." One by one, others joined him: the miners, the assayer, even old Ben, who swept the saloon floors. Widow Hanson huffed and planted herself firmly on Madeline's other side. "Bunch of fools, the lot of you," she muttered, "but I suppose we're all fools together." Tears pricked Madeline's eyes as she looked at these people, rough, hard-working folk who had so little yet were willing to stand with her against a wealthy, powerful man based solely on her word and the relationships she'd built among them. August moved to stand before her, his eyes holding hers steadily. "No one's taking you anywhere you don't want to go, Madeline. That's a promise." The schoolhouse was completed 3 days later, and despite the shadow hanging over the celebration, the town gathered for a small ceremony to mark its opening. Children ran excitedly through the new space, marveling at the rows of desks fashioned from reclaimed wood and the large slate board mounted at the front of the room. Madeline stood in the doorway, watching their excitement with a bittersweet ache in her chest. She'd grown to love these children, this town, its people. The thought of bringing danger to their doorstep was becoming increasingly unbearable. That evening, after the celebration had ended and the townsfolk had returned to their homes, Madeline made her decision. She packed her few belongings in the same worn satchel she'd arrived with and wrote 2 letters, one to the children, explaining that she had to leave but would always remember them, and one to August, harder to write, filled with things she'd never had the courage to say aloud. She waited until the boarding house was silent, then slipped out into the cool desert night. The moon hung low and full, illuminating the path as she made her way toward the edge of town, where the stage occasionally passed on its way further west. She was nearly to the crossroads when a familiar voice stopped her. Running again, Madeline, August stepped out from the shadows of a juniper tree, his face half illuminated by moonlight. He wasn't wearing his gun belt. She noticed just a man standing in the desert night, watching her with eyes that held no judgment, only a quiet sadness. "I have to," she said, her voice barely a whisper in the still air. "They'll come for me, August, you know they will. And I won't have blood shed on my account. So your answer is to disappear into the night, leave everyone who cares about you wondering if you're alive or dead." He took a step closer. "Leave me wondering." The raw emotion in his voice made her chest ache. "What choice do I have? Victor Holloway won't stop until he finds me. Men like him never do. You have the choice to stand your ground, to trust the people who care about you to stand with you." Another step closer. "To trust me." Madeline shook her head, tears threatening to spill. "I can't ask that of you of anyone. Victor's father has connections throughout the territory. They could bring legal trouble or worse. You're not asking, we're offering." August closed the distance between them, gently taking the satchel from her hand and setting it on the ground. "Madeline, when you stumbled onto my porch that night, half dead from exhaustion, something changed in Copper Creek. In me." He took her hands in his, and she was surprised to find them trembling slightly. August O'Malley, always so steady, so certain, was nervous. "I lost everything once," he continued. "During the war, thought I'd never find anything worth fighting for again. Then you arrived, and suddenly—" Madeline raised her eyes to his. "Suddenly what?" "Suddenly I had something to lose again." His voice was rough with emotion. "Someone to lose. And that terrified me, still does, but it also gives me a reason to stand and fight rather than just survive." The honesty in his words undid her. A tear slipped down her cheek, and August reached up to brush it away, his touch gentle against her skin. "Stay," he whispered. "Stay and face this. Together." Madeline closed her eyes, letting herself lean into his touch. "I'm scared, August. I know, so am I." He smiled slightly. "But I've seen you face down a classroom full of minors' children. Holloway doesn't stand a chance." A laugh escaped her despite everything, and in that moment, looking up at August's face in the moonlight, Madeline made a different choice than the one she'd been running toward. "All right," she said softly. "Together." The warning from Silver Springs proved accurate. 3 days later, just as the children were being dismissed from the new schoolhouse, 4 riders appeared on the road into Copper Creek. Leading them was Victor Holloway, as immaculate in his tailored suit as Madeline remembered, looking as out of place in the dusty mining town as a peacock among sparrows. Word spread quickly. By the time the riders reached the center of town, August was waiting, along with most of Copper Creek's men. They weren't openly armed, but Madeline, watching from the schoolhouse doorway, knew that every man there had a weapon within reach. Victor reined his horse to a stop, his gaze sweeping the gathered crowd until it landed on Madeline. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "There she is," he announced. "The thief who robbed my family and tried to murder me when caught in the act." He turned to the men accompanying him. "Restrain her." None of the riders moved. They'd clearly noticed the reception waiting for them, 30 grim-faced miners who had spent their lives working in the harshest conditions the territory had to offer. August stepped forward. "Mr. Holloway, I presume. I'm August O'Malley." "This is my town." Victor's eyebrows rose slightly. "Your town? I wasn't aware Copper Creek belonged to anyone besides the Copper Company." "Figure of speech," August replied evenly. Point is, Miss Turner is under our protection. Any business you have with her, you have with all of us." Victor laughed, a sound utterly devoid of humor. How touching, the savage little mining camp defending a criminal. He reached inside his coat and withdrew a folded paper. "I have here a warrant for her arrest, signed by Judge Willoughby of Tucson, so unless you and your associates intend to obstruct justice, I suggest you step aside." August didn't move. "May I see this warrant?" With obvious reluctance, Victor handed the document down. August studied it carefully, then passed it to the assayer who had once worked as a clerk in a California courthouse. "Looks official," the older man admitted. "But I notice it specifies she's to be returned to Tucson for trial, doesn't authorize just anyone to take her." Victor's face flushed with anger. "I am not just anyone. My father isn't here," August cut in, "and neither is any lawman from Tucson." He handed the warrant back. "Miss Turner isn't going anywhere with you, Mr. Holloway. If the Tucson authorities want to send a proper deputy with this warrant, they're welcome to. Until then, I suggest you enjoy our hospitality at the saloon and then be on your way." For a moment, it seemed Victor might explode with rage. His hand twitched toward his gun, but a quick glance around showed him how outnumbered he was. Finally, he snatched the warrant back. "This isn't over," he hissed. "No one defies the Holloways, no one." August's expression remained impassive. "Copper Creek does." Victor and his men retreated to the saloon, and August immediately called a town meeting in the new schoolhouse. The mood was tense as everyone crowded into the small building. "He'll be back," Jacob Miller said grimly. "With more men next time," August nodded. "Likely so. But we've bought time, and there's something we can do with that time." He turned to Madeline. "We need witnesses, other women who have had similar experiences with Holloway. I'm betting you weren't the first." Madeline considered this. "There was a maid who left suddenly a few months before I did. Maria Sanchez. The family claimed she'd stolen silverware, but the other servants whispered otherwise. Any idea where she went? Her family was from Nogales, I believe." August turned to the gathered townsfolk. "Anybody willing to ride to Nogales, find this Maria?" 3 miners immediately volunteered. Another offered to go to Tucson, where he had connections who might uncover more about the Holloway's reputation. "We'll need to watch the trails," August continued. "Set up lookouts, and everyone should be armed." The planning continued late into the evening. Through it all, Madeline was struck by how these people who had their own troubles, their own hardships, had unhesitatingly chosen to stand with her. For someone who had spent months running, alone and afraid, the sensation of being defended was overwhelming. As the meeting broke up, August found her sitting quietly in the corner. "You all right?" he asked, settling into the desk beside hers, comically large for his frame. "Why are they doing this?" she asked softly. "Why are you? You barely know me." August was quiet for a long moment. "When I came back from the war, I was empty, lost everything: family, home, purpose. Wandered until I couldn't wander anymore. The Apache found me half dead, nursed me back. When I asked why they'd helped a white man, the medicine woman said something I never forgot. She said, a people who won't stand together against danger will fall alone to something worse." He reached over, his rough hand covering hers. "Copper Creek isn't much, but we're a people, and you're one of us now." Madeline turned her hand beneath his, threading their fingers together. "Even if it brings danger to your door, especially then." August's eyes held hers steady and sure. "The things worth having in this life are worth fighting for." In that moment, sitting in the schoolhouse they'd built together, surrounded by the scent of fresh cut wood and chalk dust, Madeline realized she was tired of running. Whatever came next, whether victory or defeat, she would face it standing beside this man and the town that had become her home. The next 2 weeks unfolded in a state of tense vigilance. Victor and his men remained in town, taking rooms above the saloon and making their presence felt with swaggering walks down the main street and barely veiled threats. But they made no move against Madeline, clearly biding their time. Meanwhile, August's plan progressed. The miners who'd volunteered to find Maria Sanchez returned successful. She had indeed fled to her family in Nogales after Victor's unwanted advances had turned violent. More significantly, they'd found two other women with similar stories, all willing to sign affidavits about Victor's behavior. The man who'd gone to Tucson returned with even more valuable information. Judge Willoughby, who had signed the warrant, was an old friend of Victor's father and was rumored to have financial interests in Holloway mining ventures. More damning still, he'd uncovered that the Holloways had recently suffered significant losses when one of their mines flooded, leaving them desperate for funds, which might explain Victor's determination to silence Madeline, who knew too much about their family's private affairs. Through it all, life in Copper Creek continued. Madeline taught her classes each day, though August insisted on stationing men nearby for protection. In the evenings, she often found herself at the trading post with August, planning their defense while trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. It was during one such evening that August broached a subject that had clearly been weighing on his mind. "There's another option," he said quietly as they sat by the fire, "one we haven't discussed." Madeline looked up from the book she'd been pretending to read. "What's that?" August stared into the flames, his profile strong against the firelight. "You could leave, not alone with an escort, head to California maybe, start fresh where the Holloways have no reach." The suggestion struck her like a physical blow. "You want me to go?" "No." His answer was immediate and emphatic. He turned to face her fully. "God knows that's the last thing I want, but I need you to know it's an option, that no one here would think less of you for taking it." Madeline set her book aside. "Is that what you would do? Run?" A shadow passed across his face. "Once, maybe, not anymore." "What changed?" August was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost reverent. "I found something worth staying for." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Madeline felt her heart thundering in her chest as August's gaze held hers, unwavering in its intensity. "August," she began, not sure what she meant to say. He stood suddenly, moving to stoke the fire. "Just wanted you to know all your options. Whatever you decide, I'll support it." The moment had passed, but something had shifted between them, something that couldn't be undone or forgotten. Madeline watched him, this man who had become the center of her world in Copper Creek, and knew with absolute certainty that running was no longer an option she could consider. The confrontation, when it finally came, arrived from an unexpected direction. It was Sunday morning, and most of the town was gathered in the saloon, which doubled as a meeting house on the Lord's Day. The miners' wives had arranged flowers on a makeshift altar, and old Ben was leading them in a hymn when the doors burst open. Victor Holloway strode in, flanked by his men now numbering 8 all with guns drawn. But it wasn't this that caused gasps to ripple through the congregation. It was the man following behind them, tall, distinguished, with silver at his temples and cold authority in his bearing, Judge Willoughby. "This gathering is over," Victor announced, his voice cutting through the stunned silence, "by order of the territorial court." August stepped forward from where he'd been standing at the back. "What's the meaning of this interruption, Holloway?" It was the judge who answered, producing an official-looking document from inside his coat. "I have here a writ authorizing the immediate arrest of Madeline Turner on charges of theft, attempted murder, and now the additional charge of evading justice." His cold eyes swept the room until they found Madeline. "This farce has gone on long enough." Madeline felt the blood drain from her face as the judge continued. "Furthermore, I am authorizing the arrest of August O'Malley and any others who have knowingly harbored a fugitive from justice." Murmurs of outrage rose from the assembled townsfolk, but the sight of 8 armed men kept them from more direct action. August remained calm, his voice level when he spoke. "I'd like to see that writ, Your Honor." The judge handed it over with obvious reluctance. August examined it carefully, then looked up, his expression unreadable. "This appears to be in order," he admitted, and Madeline felt her hopes plummet, but then he continued. "However, I believe the court would be interested in some new evidence that has come to light regarding Mr. Holloway's character and motivations." Judge Willoughby's eyes narrowed. "What evidence?" August nodded to Jacob Miller, who slipped out the back door. "If the court will indulge us for a few moments, I believe it will become clear." The judge seemed about to refuse, but curiosity got the better of him. Very well, 5 minutes. Those 5 minutes stretched taut as a bowstring. No one in the saloon moved or spoke. Victor shifted impatiently, his hand never far from his gun, while the judge maintained his air of cold authority. Then the back door opened, and Jacob returned accompanied by 3 women. Maria Sanchez, whom the miners had brought from Nogales, and 2 others Madeline didn't recognize. All 3 stood tall, their eyes fixed on Victor with undisguised loathing. "Your Honor," August said formally, "I present Maria Sanchez, formerly employed by the Holloway family, along with Catherine Delaney and Rose Martinez. All 3 have signed affidavits attesting to violent, unwanted advances from Victor Holloway, followed by false accusations when they refused him." Victor's face contorted with rage. "This is absurd. These women are lying whores, obviously paid to silence," the judge commanded, his expression suddenly uncertain as he looked at the 3 women. Recognition flickered in his eyes as they settled on Catherine Delaney, and Madeline realized with a jolt that he knew her, perhaps had even heard her story before. August pressed his advantage. "We also have evidence suggesting the Holloway mining interests are in financial trouble, making the recovery of their stolen property surprisingly urgent." He produced documents that the man who'd gone to Tucson had acquired, and evidence of certain financial arrangements between Judge Willoughby and Holloway Mining that might constitute a conflict of interest in this case. The judge's face had gone pale. He looked from the documents to the women, then to Victor, whose hand had now moved to his gun. "Don't be a fool, Victor," the judge said quietly. "There are too many witnesses." "Witnesses can die," Victor snarled, drawing his weapon and aiming it directly at Madeline, starting with her. What happened next unfolded in a blur of motion and sound. August lunged forward as Victor's finger tightened on the trigger. The crack of gunfire echoed through the saloon, followed by screams and the sounds of overturning furniture as people dove for cover. When the chaos subsided, Victor lay on the floor, blood spreading across his fine shirt from a wound in his shoulder. August stood over him, his own gun drawn, while the judge and Victor's men found themselves facing a wall of armed miners who had produced weapons, seemingly from thin air. Judge Willoughby looked around at the grim-faced townsfolk, then down at Victor writhing on the floor, and made a swift calculation. "It appears," he said carefully, "that there are serious questions about the validity of these charges, in light of the new evidence and circumstances. I am inclined to dismiss the case against Miss Turner pending further investigation." A cheer rose from the Copper Creek residents, quickly silenced by August's raised hand. "And the charges against the town for harboring her," he pressed. The judge straightened his coat. "Also dismissed. Now I suggest Mr. Holloway receive medical attention for that wound, after which I expect him to return to Tucson with me to address these counter-accusations." It was over. As Victor was carried, cursing and threatening, to the doctor's office, and the judge retreated with what dignity he could muster, the townsfolk erupted in celebration. Madeline found herself surrounded by people offering congratulations and support, the 3 brave women who had testified embracing her with tears in their eyes. But one person was notably absent from the celebration. August had slipped away in the commotion, and when Madeline finally extricated herself from the crowd, she found him sitting alone on the steps of her schoolhouse, staring out at the desert. "August," she approached cautiously, suddenly uncertain, "are you all right? Were you hurt?" He looked up, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. "Not hurt, just needed some air." Madeline settled beside him on the step, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "You saved my life in there." August shook his head. "We all did, the whole town." "Yes, but you. You organized everything. You stood up to them first. You're the reason I'm free now." She turned to face him fully. "Why did you do all this for me, August? The truth." He was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving the horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "When you first came here, stumbling half dead onto my porch, I thought you were just another lost soul passing through. Copper Creek sees plenty of those. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But then you stayed. You built something here, not just a school, but connections. You gave those children something no one could take away from them. August turned to her then, his eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. And somewhere along the way, you gave me something too, something I thought was gone forever. Madeline's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. What was that? Hope, he said simply. A reason to look forward to tomorrow. His hand found hers on the wooden step, rough fingers entwining with her smoother ones. I couldn't let them take you, Madeline. Not just because it would have been unjust, but because I couldn't imagine Copper Creek or my life without you in it anymore. Tears blurred Madeline's vision as emotions she'd kept carefully contained for months finally broke free. My voice was barely a whisper when I arrived that night, she said softly. Do you remember what you said to me? August nodded, a smile touching his lips. You don't have to explain a thing. You gave me shelter when I had nowhere else to go, security when I was afraid. Purpose when I was lost. Madeline squeezed his hand. But most of all, you gave me a home, August, not just a place to stay, but a true home. The last light of day bathed them in gold as August reached up to touch her cheek, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. And now? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Now that you're free to go anywhere, do anything? Madeline leaned into his touch, her answer clear in her eyes even before she spoke. Now I choose to stay, here in Copper Creek, with you. The kiss, when it finally came, felt like coming home after a long journey, warm and right and perfectly inevitable. August's arms encircled her, strong and protective, as Madeline's hands found their way to his shoulders. Then his face, memorizing the contours of this man who had risked everything for her. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky above Copper Creek. The town's lights glowed warm and welcoming below them, and the sound of continued celebration drifted up from the saloon. I love you, Madeline Turner, August said, the words simple and unadorned but carrying the weight of absolute truth. Madeline's heart soared at the declaration. And I love you, August O'Malley, more than I ever thought possible. They remained on the schoolhouse steps as night fell completely, planning their future in quiet voices, a future that had once seemed impossible but now stretched before them, full of promise. Spring came to Copper Creek with unusual generosity, painting the desert in wildflowers and soft green growth. The town had changed in the months since the confrontation with the Holloways, growing larger as word spread of the rich new copper vein discovered in the northern mines, attracting more families, more businesses. The schoolhouse had expanded, with Madeline now teaching 23 students ranging from 5 to 16. August's trading post had grown as well, adding a second room to accommodate the increased demand for supplies. But the most significant change was the small house that had been built beside the schoolhouse, a wedding gift from the town to Madeline and August, who had married on Christmas Day in a ceremony that brought together everyone in Copper Creek, from the roughest miners to Widow Hanson, who had wept openly despite her repeated claims that she wasn't one for sentiment. It was in this house, on a warm April evening, that Madeline sat on the porch swing August had crafted for her, watching the sunset paint the desert in fiery hues while she graded arithmetic papers. The sound of approaching footsteps made her look up, a smile already forming on her lips. August climbed the porch steps, removing his hat as he crossed to kiss her. How was your day, Mrs. O'Malley? The name still sent a thrill through her, even after 4 months of marriage. Productive. Tommy Miller has finally mastered division, and little Emma Sanderson read an entire page without help. August settled beside her on the swing, his arm automatically finding its place around her shoulders. And how are you feeling? Not too tired? His concern made her smile widen. Since the day 3 weeks ago when she'd told him they were expecting a child, August had become even more protective, watching her for any sign of discomfort or fatigue. I'm perfectly fine, she assured him, leaning into his embrace. We both are. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the colors fade from the sky as stars began to appear. From town came the sounds of life, piano music from the saloon, children's laughter as they squeezed in last games before bedtime, the blacksmith's hammer falling in rhythmic strikes. "I got a letter today," August said finally. "From the territorial governor's office." Madeline turned to look at him. "What did it say?" "Victor Holloway has been convicted of fraud and attempted murder. He'll serve 10 years in the territorial prison." August's expression was solemn. "His father's mining empire is collapsing. Seems they've been falsifying production reports for years." The news should have brought Madeline satisfaction, but instead she felt only a quiet relief. "It's truly over then," August nodded. "Judge Willoughby has been removed from the bench. The governor sent a formal apology for your treatment and offered compensation for damages." Madeline shook her head in wonder. "A year ago I was running for my life, certain I'd never see justice. Now you're safe," August finished, his hand finding hers. "Respected, loved." "Yes," she agreed, turning her face up to his. "Very much loved." As August's lips met hers in a tender kiss, Madeline reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought her to this moment, from desperate flight to hard-won peace, from solitude to belonging. The journey had been fraught with danger and uncertainty, but standing on the other side, she wouldn't change a single step. Later that night, as they lay together in their bed, August's hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach, Madeline thought about the future they were building, not just for themselves, but for their child and the growing community of Copper Creek. "What do you think about expanding the school again?" she murmured. "Jacob says there are 3 more families moving in next month. We'll need more space by fall." August chuckled, his breath warm against her hair. "Always planning, aren't you? We've barely finished the addition." "It's good to be prepared," she countered, smiling in the darkness. "True enough." His arms tightened around her. "Though some of the best things in life come without any planning at all." Madeline couldn't argue with that. After all, she had never planned to stumble half-dead onto the porch of a trading post in a tiny mining town. She had never planned to find a community that would stand with her against all odds. And she certainly had never planned to fall in love with a quiet, steadfast cowboy who had looked at her in her most desperate moment and said simply, "You don't have to explain a thing." Yet here she was, safe in his arms, their child growing within her, their future stretching bright before them. Sometimes, Madeline reflected as sleep began to claim her, the most beautiful destinations were the ones you never planned to reach. "I love you, August O'Malley," she whispered. His response came soft and sure in the darkness. "And I love you, Madeline O'Malley. Yesterday, today, and all the tomorrows to come." In the quiet of their home, with the desert nights stretching vast and star-filled around them, that promise felt as solid and enduring as the mountains that cradled Copper Creek, a love born in whispers and courage, destined to echo through all the chapters of their lives yet to be written.